at the end of the day, my advice to you, if there's one takeaway, is get out of your head, figure out what you want, and have a strong enough why. Burn the boats, no plan B, because then that's an excuse. You're waiting for that plan B. So for me, I left my job and I said, I'm never coming back. The idea of fear is something that we manifest. It's something we create. You have two people, same situation. One's fearful, one jumps in without any fear. The owning a franchise is not fearful. Is not fearful. It's what you make of it.
Welcome to the Franchise Freedom Podcast, where you can escape the corporate trap through franchise ownership. Here's your host, Giuseppe Grammatico, the Franchise Guide.
Welcome to the Franchise Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Giuseppe Grammatico, your franchise guide, the show where we help corporate executives experience time and financial freedom via franchising. Thanks for joining us today. Wanted to switch gears a little bit. I thought, you know what, while we're on various topics and I've been answering a lot of questions, I wanted to record a quick show talking about my experience buying my first franchise, my first business, as well as what I observe from the candidates that we work with on a daily basis. So I hope you find this super helpful. I wish someone had explained this to me when I started my journey over 2 decades ago. And I don't think, and this is, I think, episode 229. This will be our 5th year with the show. And something I don't think we've really talked too much about. I think it's been maybe a subject or a topic that came up within a kind of a bigger theme. But that the topic for today is fear, addressing fear. What is fear, and whether that's good or bad, and specifically how to get through. I did a quick search and read a couple blogs and a couple stories, and Zig Ziglar and we're going to post the link to the article, give him credit obviously for this, but fear, the acronym FEAR, is either forget everything and run. Yep. And run. That's it. Or face everything and rise, which I have never heard of. That was actually really interesting. And at the bottom, he wrote, the choice is yours. Really, you have the option. Are you going to forget everything and run, or face everything and rise? So that really struck a chord. That really hit home. And I said, wow, that is very interesting, because everyone deals with fear differently. Another acronym that I know going back in the day that people would share with me is false evidence appearing real. Fear, the topic of fear comes up a lot because, people don't, when looking at a franchise, including myself, to be completely honest, when I was looking at my first business, well over 2 decades ago, actually 25 years ago, I had launched a little automotive detailing business on the side. That was my first kind of side hustle. Actually, going back even further, selling candy. I remember purchasing $20 worth of candy at a nickel, and I think selling it for a quarter back in grade school. I forget the exact amounts, but I always had that entrepreneurial spirit, putting out a lot of my own money. $20 in grade school and elementary school was quite a bit of money. But the whole idea of fear is interesting, because sometimes it manifests as something else. So it manifests into things like, I need to think about it. It manifests into things like, well, I need to ask my partner, my spouse, whoever's going to be involved in the business. And it almost becomes similar to an excuse. Not to say, by the way, you shouldn't involve your spouse, your partner, or anyone involved in the business. I talk about that in my book. That's really important, and they should really be on any of your initial calls to really understand the process of what's going on. But I've noticed people understand I'm scared. I didn't say that. I remember working with my franchise coach and consultant back in 05, 06. It came to just buying time. You need to think a little bit, not ready for a call. Can lose all my entire investment. What about if it doesn't work out, and things like that? Fear, for many people, it's negative, right? It's about, okay, I'm so fearful. What do I do? It's this really strong emotion. And then they kind of shut down and then do nothing about it. Working with various coaches and individuals, I learned that, actually, perfect example, John Allen Mollenhauer, had him on the show. We'll link that show as well. I'm going to make a quick little note, or I'm going to forget. So part of what I do is I keep a Word document open, and I make sure that our marketing company editors, they can insert that as a quick reference. You don't have to remember this, especially if you're coming back or you're driving and you want to come back and just click on the link. So talked about, he specializes in healing the body naturally, light therapies and things like that. But his big thing when we worked together was energy. Just because you're sleeping for 8 hours a day, you could still feel drained. So, what is depleting the energy? And the idea of fear, number one, depletes your energy, constantly thinking of worst case scenario, putting you in a negative spot. When you're in a negative spot, you're tired, right? You're looking at worst case scenarios. But I think it was Jim Carrey did a speech years ago. I forget the university that'll come to me, but he talked about just this idea of obviously having that internal story, but also it projects our views on things. And when you're in fear, when you're lack of energy, you're really down, you're kind of looking out there and everything is kind of negative, and you kind of start to miss the opportunities because you're viewing everything in a negative light. So John Allen Mollenhauer, things we work on is different mindsets, different ways of looking at things, making certain decisions. This was a big one for me. Maybe not during the week back in the day. This is actually, I was still at my W 2 when we had first started working together. So I had a 5 hour commute, worked for 8 hours, ready to start a family, just bought a home, got just recently got married. I was exhausted. Monday to Friday was not the time to be making any decisions or looking at anything. It was really, I did a lot of my research initially about starting my own business was on the weekends. On the weekend, I got to, instead of getting up at 5:30 or 5 a.m. To get to work, I got up at 8 or 9. So the extra hours of sleep, I was in a different state, different mindset, just was rested, much more positive and willing to look at things and not depleted. When the energy is depleted, sometimes you just have to what you're doing, step away, get some additional rest. Working more hours doesn't necessarily equate to any additional efficiencies or outcomes. A 15-minute task can drag on for 2 or 3 hours. But so going back to this idea of fear is that this is something that we make up in our heads and say, okay, I'm fearful of this. So in the case of owning a business, the fear is natural. Yes, there's a risk involved and I can lose my business and I can lose my investment. And naturally, as humans, we're wired to think of the worst, right? It's this idea of being in protection way back when as humans evolved and always trying to protect and go to safety. And people will prioritize safety over the flip side and prosperity. So they're like, you know what? The pain is too much there of the loss. It outweighs the gain or the success. So I'm not going to move forward with that business or any business. I'm going to keep my safe job. And what I tell people is, again, in a rested state, when your mind is clear and you're kind of away from distraction, is really taking a step back and jotting things down, getting things out of your head to figure out what the true fear is. This individual I work with, and this is the exact same process that I used in figuring out if I wanted to own a business, was jotting things down like, okay, what is the worst case scenario in a business? Well, the investment was 100,000. I can lose that. I can go out of business and may have to go back and find a job afterwards if I had failed. But then that coach said to me, well, what about if you don't fail? What if you succeed? The why and why you're doing this was to spend time with your family. At that current job, you're not going to have any time to spend with the kids and your future families. What happens if you succeed? You're home every day and not miss any events. Okay. Maybe you're not making millions of dollars, but you're making the same, if not better, money with some huge tax benefits. As the business increases, you can get into other businesses, maybe even scale back the hours even more because now you have a general manager in place. Now you start to build the time freedom, the financial freedom, the freedom of purpose, doing something that can help other individuals. Maybe that's helping someone, hiring them and donating. We started donating more. Maybe you want to start your own charity. Dan Sullivan talks about the freedom of working with people you enjoy working with, not being stuck at a job and working with 20 different managers, physical freedom, physical location, getting to work from home and avoiding a 5 hour times 25-hour commute. Whereas now you're walking 10 feet to the next bedroom because you're working from home. What is the best case scenario? When they outlined it like that, I said, okay, great. These are my options. I personally had so much pain. I had a lot of fear, let's be honest, but I also had a lot of pain and said, you know what? I hated my job. I disliked my job. I shouldn't say hate. I disliked my job and hated, I will say hated on the commute. the pain was there. And the idea of not seeing my kids grow up, my father, we owned the restaurant. We hardly saw him. We actually saw him as we got older more and more because we ended up working at our restaurant. So those are the things we looked at. We looked at different scenarios. We wrote them down because once they're in your head, they start to kind of spiral out of control. Now it's fear is turning into more confusion. Fear it has its positive effects, right? It wants to keep you safe. It wants to make sure you're doing your homework, but you got to do the homework, not just say worst case. What about best case? What about if you're average? In a franchise, you have the franchisor built the system. They took on a lot of the risk, and obviously there was tons of fear there, but they took on the risk. They figured out the brand, the model, the best way to market, who the ideal franchise avatar is, what skill set do they need. They've done all that for you. And I'm not saying there's no risk involved with the franchise, but they're doing a lot of the heavy lifting for you. You pay the one-time franchise fee. You have access to the entire system day one, and you're able. Franchise companies will talk all the time. Corporate location. It took us 10 years to hit 1 million in revenue, and our job is to get you to hit those revenue numbers in a fraction of the time. Maybe it's a couple of years, maybe it's a year, because we took our time figuring out the best ways of going about business, where to get customers, more importantly, how to keep those customers on, and they're figuring all that out. So when you're running these exercises and looking at businesses, look at the worst case and the best case, writing down on top your why. At the end of the day, businesses have ups and downs, and you want that why to get you through especially those down periods when maybe key employee left, customer or client cancels, and things like that. I believe fear and excitement are similar in how they make you feel, and even anxiety. We'll throw that one in there. Start to sweat, your heart starts to beat much faster. Your mind's kind of racing. And I remember signing my first franchise agreement. Basically, it's February 5th. So this is actually I got into franchising February 5th of 2007, excuse me, 2007. We're approaching, was at 18 years, and we'll be at 20 very soon here. And then looking back at 18 years of owning businesses, just because you bought the business doesn't mean fear goes away. There's also fear in running a business. What happens if the new employee doesn't work out? What happens if the double in marketing spend doesn't increase my sales, my revenue, my profitability by so much? So it's really figuring out, okay, let's gather all the information. And one interesting thing that I just heard, it was the president of the IFA. They did a webinar with, I believe the company was with a partner with Floor Coverings International. He had said that 2/3 of individuals that they've interviewed had showed interest in owning a business. So of Americans, 2/3, that's 67%. And then of that 67, 2/3 of that group, another 67%, said the reason they did not move forward with the business is they didn't know where to start. I think that is part of it. I think it's not knowing where to start in the fear, and having a clear path is helpful. But with that clear path, you need to make sure to document. You need to make sure to document and jot everything down so you can compare the pros on the left, the cons on the right. What is your why up top? What are the fears and concerns? Jot them down. If you're working with the franchise company, you may have them address, well, worst case, my business doesn't work. The brain may come back and say, well, you could sell your business. Maybe it's a break even. Maybe you lose a few bucks. Maybe all the equipment is purchased back by the franchisor at the cost that you paid, offsetting some of the risk. Whatever the case may be, you want to address those. And so write the concerns down and ask them. And no one can guarantee your success. Obviously, when you go into any type of business, I always say burn the boats, no plan B, because then that's an excuse. You're waiting for that plan B. So for me, I left my job and I said, I'm never coming back. I'm going to be unhireable. No, you can never hire. No one can ever hire me again. And that's 20 years ago. And I kept to that commitment because I was dedicated and I knew there was going to be ups and downs. I had grit. I knew that I was just going to make the best of it. I knew times were going to be good and times were going to be bad. And sure enough, I can definitely vouch for that. We've had some interesting times dealing with COVID, dealing with the markets collapse in 2008 and some other stuff, various elections and interest rates up and down. So we've experienced a lot, but again, going back to the fear, really addressing what the issues are. And also with fear in information gathering, you want to make sure that you're talking with people not just all successful business owners, but you don't want to get into the trap of talking with people that will give you advice on not owning a business, which I personally did. And a majority of those people were giving me kind of insights from friends or family or someone they knew that lost everything in a business or lost their investment. Yet the person I'm speaking with never owned the business. And I'm not saying you can't talk to people that had never owned a franchise or a business, but be careful of who you ask. Don't start talking to people and then you start getting, well, let me talk to other people that failed. You want to hear some key themes, exactly what caused them to fail. Did they give up? Was it the franchisor's fault? Was it a company that stopped supporting them? Did they not follow the system? If it was something non-franchise, what exactly about what was it the cause? Was it just bad timing? Was it an industry that was being taken over by AI or technology? So really diving deep to say, okay, that business failed. I lost a lot of money, but I didn't move with the times. I didn't go to utilizing AI or doing virtual meetings and things like that. I just decided to dig my feet into the ground and not change. You want to talk to various people, but the concerns, I found that the biggest thing for me was fear and anxiety and jotting down my questions and concerns and then checking them off and saying, okay, I'm going to ask my franchise consultant about these three areas. Worst case scenario, if the business fails, how can I sell my business? What other expenses are involved? I want to guarantee success and keep the costs low. How do I increase my odds? I decided to leave my job and run the business full time. I wanted full control of the business. I wanted to learn every aspect of the business before starting to hire. Looking back, I did wait a little bit too long there. Didn't have to be an expert in all areas. I definitely wanted to touch all areas, which I did, and I don't regret, but could have made the decision to bring on people sooner and scale a little bit more faster. That would be kind of looking back, and nothing is ever perfect. If you had a crystal ball, you'd make some changes. But again, going into fear, you'll notice that in different situations, we created this huge thing in our head of fear of. There's examples of riding a bike for the first time. What about if I fall? What about if I hit my head? Or for me, it was public speaking. I was extremely fearful. What was the worst case? I'm in college. I remember talking with a group of 15 people. Half of them, I don't think were even paying attention. What was the worst case scenario? I screwed up. I forgot the topic I was talking about, which happened. I had index cards. I picked up just where it was left off. I wasn't giving a presidential speech or a speech in front of thousands of people. It was just my professor and 15 other students. And once you start breaking down what the fear is and the worst case scenarios, you're like, you know what? This isn't so bad. You have two different people, same situation. One person dies in and the other person will never ride that bike or ever speak in public. And they may be a phenomenal speaker because they let fear take over. So I think the writing things out is super helpful. Doing it on the weekends, maybe when you're a little bit more rested, you don't have the phones ringing, you don't have distractions in school and pickup and all that kind of stuff going on. And I think that to me is something that is made up in our minds. If we want change, there's going to be some discomfort, right? We don't know kind of what to expect. There's the fear of the unknown, not knowing what the unknown is. And when you map it up as much as you can by asking the questions, addressing the concerns, speaking with fellow franchisees, that's a benefit of a franchise. You're talking with people that kind of went through it. Maybe it's an emerging brand and the first year of franchisees, they said, yes, this is a great business model. The franchisor took a little bit longer with the marketing as they were tweaking some things. Maybe they were figuring things out, but that's all been ironed out. So by the time you come on board, we feel like that's all been figured out and that won't be an issue going forward. You can also address that directly with the franchisor. Hey, what have you done in the past? I've heard some issues with the marketing. Are there going to be any changes? So addressing this stuff, not hiding behind excuses. At the end of the day, I will tell you this with 100% certainty, a business is not for everyone. A franchise business is not for everyone. It's up to you to really have a full understanding of the business model, not be so fearful to say, finally, I just give up on this. Well, maybe you should stay with your job. Maybe it's a hybrid approach. Someone said to me, well, my only fear is the income. I've run the pro forma. I've run the scenarios. I have all that information. The business just takes twice as long to get up and running. And I'll say, great. If at the end of the day, no one can create that pro forma, The franchisor's role is to give you some information, talk to the franchisees, put together your own pro forma. They'll kind of list out the potential expenses you can incur. But ultimately, if that is the one thing, like narrowing it down, you like the business, you want to move forward, you want time freedom, you want financial freedom, you love everything about it, but that, then you say, well, what are other ways I can run this business? And in some cases, it's keeping your job the first year and hiring a key employee or general manager to run the business. Nothing wrong with that. But when you do that, you have to set the expectation. Great. No one's going to run the business like you. You hire a general manager, you're going to have to stay close to them. So it's not just set it and forget it. And hopefully they make the business profitable. In the very beginning, you're going to have to find the right person. You're going to go to training together and you're going to touch base. And maybe a daily call at the start, and then that changes to weekly. Maybe it's dinner once a week, whatever the case may be, but at least once a week, check-in call. What's going on? What are the wins? What are the losses? Were there any cancellations? Where are the opportunities? And that kind of deal. And staying very close to them, keeping in mind your investment is going to, and your monthly amount, your expenses will be increased, because if you have I gave this example on the last show, general manager, maybe they get 50 or 60,000 to make an even number salary. So your initial franchise investment, that's 5K a month times 3. So with fees, payroll, insurance, you're looking at an additional 20,000. But just to keep it simple, 7,000 a month in additional expense, but you are keeping your full-time salary. So keeping that in mind, and having I have that 1 week period, that 1 year period. So I know that today is February 1st, 2025. By February 5th, 2026, or February 4th, well, the day before, I'm going to quit my job, obviously give the appropriate notice and dive in full time, whether that's running it full time or not needing. Maybe it's only kind of part time, but there are different ways of addressing it. But ultimately, I think fear has a lot to do with education, getting informed of every aspect of the business, the worst case, the best case. What does the average franchisee do? Talking with the franchisees, writing out the concerns and asking. Some people are embarrassed to ask a question. I always say I work together. No silly questions, no stupid questions, all great questions. I had someone, this person was, I believe, just graduating college, and he had set up a call, and that individual said, well, I heard on a podcast, I don't know what podcast, but when you buy a franchise, you can't lose money. You can't lose your investment. And I said, well, that's absolutely false. There's always going to be a risk, regardless of the brand, regardless of the opportunity. There's ways to minimize risk with a franchise. If you're launching a business, sometimes, as I mentioned, the franchisor can help you sell that business for a fee. They may guarantee to buy back your equipment. Whatever the case may be, there's always going to be value in the business, depending for the right person. If you're able to sell it, maybe you grow it for a year, don't like it, you can go to sell. You want to cover all these different scenarios, but again, we can't predict what the future will bring. So really keep everything in perspective. If you really want a change, there's going to be some discomfort. We're going to call it discomfort. We can call it fear. We can call it anxiety, and we can call it excitement. I remember signing my franchise agreement, and I was sweating. My heart was beating really quick. I remember that day like it was yesterday. That's 18 years ago. And that was excitement. And it was a little bit of anxiety. I did all my homework. I just wanted to get up and running. And we went to training. 30 days later, I think it was the 31st day, we went out on a first sales appointment with our coach, landed our first sales appointment. We closed our first deal, and it was a success. Did it make us a ton of money? Absolutely not. It was a very small account, but it helped with alleviate some of that fear and that unknown, and created some momentum. At the end of the day, my advice to you, if there's one takeaway, is get out of your head, figure out what you want, and have a strong enough why. If you just want to make a few extra bucks and there's various side hustles, that's great. But if you really want change, you want to grow something, build an enterprise, build a business, figure out why you want to do it, figure out what the ideal business looks like. Let's look at the worst case scenario, best case scenarios, kind of in between. Talk to your fellow franchisees and business owners, both in and outside of your area, and put everything together. Involve your partner, spouse, anyone else involved in the business. Make sure they're on calls. You may be missing something. We talked about in the previous episode, someone was looking at a resale franchise. Owner was netting 200, taking 200,000 a year. They were going to buy that business for 3x, so 600,000. And right off the bat, they were going to take home 200,000. And I said, well, one thing you're missing is that owner did not have any debt. They've had that business over a decade. What are you netting? You're not netting 200,000. And this is everything staying consistent. All the customers stay on. There's no change. Everything stays exactly the same. But who's servicing your debt? And if that debt service to debt is 100,000 a year, you're only walking away with 100,000. Now you're growing and there's enterprise value, that there's value that you're building within the business and tax benefits. That's a whole nother conversation, but that person is not taking home 100, 200K. They're taking home 100,000 because they have to service their debt. And then obviously with a variable rate SBA loan, you want to factor in, okay, how much is that? If rates are going down, how much does that affect me? Best thing and as we're talking, I jotted the note down to reference the show. Get a Word document. Actually, a Google Doc, I think, is best. That way, if you are working and exploring franchises and you and your spouse are going to do this together, jot it down. It's live. You can tell who edited the document, writing all your fears. Your spouse can add additional fears or say, these are some questions. I think that at the end of the day will help alleviate as much of that as possible. And starting with why, and then all the questions you have. And maybe it's not concerns or fears, but they're questions. Jot them down. That information will ease a lot of some people. I'm looking at this franchise, but I don't know if it's a good fit. And I'll say, well, why do you feel that way? Well, I don't have enough information. I don't know how much money I can truly make. And I said, well, at the end of the day, this is a business. They can give you some historical information, and that's usually in the item 19. It's a financial representation. But ultimately, you're right. You don't have that information because you've only had one call with the franchise company. Their second and third calls dive into financials. Your fourth and fifth calls will be speaking directly with franchise owners and asking them directly. So absolutely, information is where the fear is coming up and making you uncertain and uncomfortable. You want to get that information, and a proper timeline, or a usual timeline, I should say, is just do a quick little two-way interview, an intro call, second call, go into financials. Maybe you'll get the franchise document, go into territories and pro formas and things like that. And by fourth, fifth call, now you're talking with franchisees. You got the data in the franchise disclosure document. Now you have the franchisees that you can speak with, learn about the rookies and what their costs are, and the guys that have been doing it for a while. What are the fixed costs? What are the variables? And really get educated. So yes, having one call with the franchise, is that going to answer all your questions? No, it's going to take a handful of calls to really learn the business. Factor in a brand that is a good fit. And assuming you're doing this the right way, and talking to brands where you create that model. So again, to alleviate the fear, this is the model. I want something that has low overhead. Great. No brick and mortar location because I don't want to deal with a landlord and leases. Great. Okay. Well, that's in the model, right? I want something that has very few employees. We'll jot that down. The investment all in on a single territory is going to be, I want it to be under 200,000 where I can get a loan and put down as little as possible. Great. Now, when you're putting together that model, that's also going to alleviate the fears and the concerns, because now you're saying, I want something that checks off not some, but all of these boxes. I don't want brick and mortar. Okay, great. I can get up and running much faster. Don't have to worry about a landlord or the building being sold and I have to relocate. I can start off with myself as the only employee in the business, or one employee, keeping the costs low. I don't know how to do marketing. I want the company to do that. Great. We look at brands that will handle marketing and even in most cases provide a call center. Do all franchises provide that? Absolutely not. Do many? Yes. And we can look at one, again, checking off all the boxes, not just turnkey marketing and not a call center, but they're going to have both. So we'll look at that. We'll look at brands. What else is out there? We looked at the different roles. We looked at the investment. So essentially, once you have everything checked, it may be something, another thing that works regular business hours. I don't want to be on call nights and weekends, even though that may be a key employee. Maybe that key employee leaves and you're in that role. Maybe you have to make an overnight call or meeting once in a blue moon. But if you want to avoid that, just a business that maybe works with schools within regular school hours. When the schools close, there's no need for your service. And that works in line directly with your kids' school, public school, things like that. We jot those in and only look for brands that, again, check off not 8 of the 10 boxes, but all 10 boxes. So now you're dictating what this business looks like. No nights and weekends, smaller investment, service. I can get up and running in 90 days or less. Now we're working off a model and saying, okay, this universe of 4,000 franchises in 75 plus industries. Now I'm going to shrink that down to maybe 3 brands that check off all the boxes. And hey, guess what? Just because they check off the boxes, I'm left with just say 20, only 3 of those are available in my territory. That's the other thing, right? So we want to make sure we look for brands that check off all the boxes, but also are available in your market. Maybe there's a resale in your market that increases the number of brands, and it goes from 3 to 5. We can help you in both cases. So when you start dictating, okay, this is exactly what my business looks like. Okay, now we have something. So all my fears of working nights and weekends, don't have to worry about it. No landlord, don't have to worry about it. 200 is the most I want to invest. Maybe putting 20 or 30% down in an SBA. That's within my comfort zone. I have plenty of money to fund $1 million brick and mortar project. I am not there yet. I want to start off a little bit smaller investment. Great. Once we whittle it down, now you have that ideal business. Now we're working off your criteria, your ideal business. And maybe it changes for whatever reason. A partner gets involved. Maybe a spouse that wasn't willing to leave their job is now interested in joining the business. So we change it up. We put it on a Google Doc, and that's something we can change up. So I think these are, I didn't have a real, like I normally do, these are 5 things to avoid, in a franchise, or 5 things to look for. I wanted just to have this conversation around fear because very few people in the thousands of people we've helped, and not everyone has purchased franchises. Many of them just was initial education, timing wasn't right. But of all the people, very few people, I shouldn't say no one, very few have come back saying, I'm fearful, I'm scared. They're coming back with ghosting, not returning email or calls because they just can't get out of their heads. They don't realize, just like a franchise is a process, there's a process of finding a business. And if we had the opportunity to have a second call and outline exactly what their business is, eliminating 90% of their fears, then it just makes the process so much more enjoyable. I'm not saying fear never creeps up. It makes it much more enjoyable, and you're willing to go through the process. And again, this is the idea of fear is something that we manifest. It's something we create. You have 2 people, same situation. One's fearful. One jumps in without any fear. The owning a franchise is not fearful. Is not fearful. It's what you make of it. But ultimately, what that can turn into, can a job ever create time and financial freedom? Well, it may give you some financials, but I got to show up 9 to 5 every single day. I need to be in the office. I only get 2 weeks vacation. Whereas a business may have you working a lot more hours to get started, but can it create that financial freedom? Yeah, I can sell my business. We gave the example of 3 multiple. It could be a lot more. It could be less. 3 to 5 is where we see a lot of businesses, but that number really depends on the buyer and the situation and the time freedom. I've never missed a kids events, Girl Scouts, dance, or soccer. Those are the things. That's the time freedom that if you have to report to an office and only get 2 weeks vacation, you don't have that location freedom. You don't have that time freedom. Look for the things that you really want to create. The people that uncertainty is there. And I always tell people there's a hybrid approach. Start the business, keep the job, hire a key employee with the goal, I'd say in 12 months, 6 months, whatever the case may be, put it on the calendar. You're going to be involved. You're going to leave that job and you're going to be involved full time. I know I've been rambling there. I'm going to put the link to Zig Ziglar. I'll link a show with Jam, as we call him, John Allen Mullenhour. We talk about energy depletion, recharging the batteries, just some great suggestions. You can check him out as far as just getting your energy level there, exercise, sleep. He specializes in that area. Really great episode. We try to incorporate some wellness and some value add outside of franchise and business. So anyone that's listening can benefit from there. And I'd love to hear your feedback. Agree, disagree. I'm open to it. I know this is a sensitive topic, but love to hear your comments. And I'll see you guys on the other side. If you're ready to chat, ggthefranchiseguide.com, the website, hit contact, schedule a call. Love to, or just leave me a comment on whatever platform you're seeing this show. And I'll talk to you guys soon. See ya.
Thanks for tuning in. If you want to learn how to make the transition from corporate to owning your franchise, join Giuseppe on the next episode. You can also follow on all social media platforms and achieve financial and time freedom today.